Welcome to acTVism Munich. I'm your host, Zain Raza. Today we're joined by William Binney, the recipient of the 2015 Sam Adams Award, which is given for intelligence professional that stand for integrity and ethics. William Binney was the former technical director of the World Geopolitical and Military Analysis Reporting Group and a crypto-mathematician at the NSA. He worked there for almost 4 decades until he resigned after 9/11 as the agency began to implement domestic spying programs that he says are unconstitutional. He's also a whistleblower, having disclosed information about the Defense Department in 2012 regarding corruption, waste, fraud, and abuse in the agency. William Binney, thank you for joining us today.
No, thanks for having me.
So let's start with some elementary definitions. What is a whistleblower?
A person exposing illegality, fraud, waste, abuse in government or industry or basically in anywhere, local, state, or federal government. So it's a way for people to, or even in industry where you have, for example, medical threats to the public. For example, if something is contaminated and they produce contaminated food, then somebody exposing that is a whistleblower. So it's somebody who is exposing that kind of threatening thing to the public or the fraudulent or criminality of that kind of activity. So it's somebody who's exposing things that are meant to be, needed to be known by the public.
So whenever we talk about whistleblowers, no limitations are drawn upon. Are there any acts that whistleblowers should not be doing when they're working for companies or industries or the government?
Well, as long as whatever they're doing, it's not, it shouldn't be unconstitutional, illegal, and under the law, or for example, a threat to the public. If the companies or governments are doing that, then there's no reason for the whistleblowers to even act like a whistleblower. I mean, you're not whistleblowing anything that's illegal at that point. So I mean, you're just talking about doing a job for a company or a government, then that's fine. But that's not what a whistleblower would do. You wouldn't be classified as a whistleblower by doing your job.
So are there any differentiation to be drawn on between activists and whistleblowers?
Whistleblower is an activist in the sense of taking the issue public and not allowing people to control the knowledge of what's happening. So that is being active in that sense, if that's what you mean, yeah.
So let's change gears here a little bit and talk about your experience. You were in the NSA for almost 36 years, if I'm correct.
A little over 36, yeah.
And what happened all of a sudden? You became an outspoken critic, even a whistleblower. What was the turning point?
Well, actually, I was still working to try to correct the government inside the government channels through 2007. So that was 6 years of effort there, almost 7, I guess, pretty close to 7 years, that we were trying to, I along with several others, were trying to get the government to correct its illegal, unconstitutional activity. But after they came in order to silence us, they sent the FBI at us and also the Department of Justice to fabricate evidence to try to charge us and put us in jail. When they started that fabricating of evidence, that was the last straw, because that meant we had no justice system whatsoever. We had a Department of Justice that wasn't a Department of Justice. We had a government that wasn't a government, it was a dictatorship. It's a totalitarian state. We no longer, Ronald Reagan said we are a country with a government. Now, that meant we were a government with a country. So that was the turning point. At that point, I was ready to go on the attack publicly.
You just give a brief overview. Could you talk in detail about the entire case, how the FBI intruded your privacy, and even this Justice Department case that you alluded to?
The FBI was sent, of course, by the Department of Justice, the Attorney General, because this was like the morning of the second day after the Attorney General of the United States, Gonzales, testified to the Senate Judiciary Committee about the terrorist surveillance program of the president, in which time all he talked about was the illegal, the warrantless wiretapping program, which was a minuscule amount of what was going on. I mean, we had the bulk surveillance of everybody, even at that time, and all the way back to 2001. That's when that started. So So they didn't even talk about that, and they didn't even talk about any of the CIA programs or any of the other NSA programs that fell under the terrorist surveillance program, all of which were unconstitutional and illegal. Some of it against international law and human rights and war crimes. Okay, so they were afraid, of course, that we would say something because we had a history of going to committees to tell them what was really true, and so
they must have presented an argument whenever you were using legal channels to
yes
from superiors basically, and sort of the reform from within, if I can put it that way.
Right.
So what arguments were they giving you?
Okay, here's the only argument that was given to me personally. That was from the now Senator Burr, who is now the head of the Senate Intelligence Committee. When we talked to him about this in early 2002, when he was on the House Intelligence Committee as a representative, he said, we all understand that NSA is really messed up, that there's real problems there, but now's not the time to fix it. Well, here we are 13 years later, and it's the same state. And now's not the time to fix it, right? So when is the time? That was a way to put people off. That was the way to say, well, now's not the time, guys. Go away, come back some other time.
So getting away from your experience and talking generally about the surveillance state, talk about its magnitude in scope. Are they able to spy on every single thing? Is it really that far now that they know what each and every person is doing on Earth?
Yeah, it's pretty much that. It's in terms of collecting data of information like emails and phone calls and chatter and bank transactions, credit card use and things like that. Yes, they have the data, and now they have a program that just came out from the Edward Snowden material called Treasure Map, which is the objective is to be able to monitor the activities and movements minute by minute, day by day, of at least 4 billion people. Okay, so that means they will know where everybody in the world is, fundamentally. Those who use 4 billion is about the right number of people who use emails and things like, and computers or laptops and things of that nature, so that they can be traced as they move around.
So you tried to invent a program, if I'm correct, which was supposed to be constitutional, both in the domestic sense and complying to international law, which was more targeted. Could you talk about this program?
Yeah.
And is it still, can it be still applied to today's system?
Well, first of all, I didn't try to do it. We actually did it. Okay, and it was running for 1.5 years on roughly the equivalent of 3 fiber optic lines. So continuously, 24 hours a day. And it was successfully doing that. And it was a focused attack on only material. That was the point, the whole objective of it, because at the time NSA was failing because they had, even with the minuscule amounts of collection they had, they were getting overloaded, their analysts were getting overloaded, and they were failing. They couldn't follow everything because the data they were using, the way they were approaching it with dictionary select kind of terms, made it impossible for them to get through the data every day.
So basically the bureaucracy was constraining them.
Right. In fact, they advocated it because it made more collection, you see.
Why do they do it? I mean, isn't it sort of
money?
Contradictory in itself?
Well, it's money. You see, if you take in more data, it takes more money to manage. It takes a bigger budget. It takes a bigger store. You have to buy, first of all, you got to buy the access to it, and then you have to buy equipment to collect it. Then you have to buy all the communications to transport it. And then you have to buy all the place to store it. Then you have to buy all the programs to analyze it. Then you have to buy all the analysts to look at it. See, it's a big industrial production here that's building an empire, an intelligence empire, and that's what they've got. And the point is that by doing that, and then by doubling down on the collection, by taking everything, that now makes it I call this now a data bulk failure. Like Paris was a data bulk failure. Boston was a data bulk failure. So was Times Square, the Times Square bomber. So was Fort Hood. All of them. Everything that's happened has been a data bulk failure. And what they've done, you see, is what it does. It gives them a lot of data on everybody, so they can retroactively analyze what they did. Well, that's a forensics approach. That's policing. Right.
So basically, they had the data about 9/11, for example.
Yes.
And they couldn't, because there was so much data in bulk.
That's correct.
They couldn't just filter through it specifically, and that was what your program was all about.
And that's what it did. It was the idea of how to look into massive amounts of data as it flows by without actually having to look at it. If you have to look at the data, you're doomed. You can't get through it. So we devised a way to do it with metadata, to be able to focus in on things that are of interest, that our analysts should be looking at, to extract that. It was a data selection, not a data collection issue. So it became a data, how can you smartly select the data, make your analysts succeed, stop the bad guys, do the right thing, protect everybody's privacy, and do that. And that's what we invented with that program.
And it has something to do with the two-degree principle also. Could you elaborate on that?
What that simply meant was if you had a network for terrorists that you knew were terrorists, those were your known targets, then you would look out only 2 degrees beyond them to see that's the zone of suspicion of what we call the zone of suspicion, which means that people in that zone, if they're not known terrorists, they have to be looked at. Their data has to be examined to be sure, first of all, that they are not part of that terrorist organization, and in which case, if you could show that over time, you couldn't show any relationship whatsoever, you would delete them from that zone of suspicion. And you could mark them as not of interest to any further activity or collection or monitoring. And that's the way we would handle it. And it was a way of making sure that the analysts could figure out anybody new joining into bad activities as they did it, and be able to make sure that if people who joined in were not a part of it, that there was a way out for them, that they weren't monitored beyond that. It also gave everybody else in the world, all the other 7 billion people, privacy, because all their data would just go right by and you wouldn't take it in.
Now that we've talked about a program that falls in the realm of solutions, basically, what methods can we employ to make the NSA more transparent?
Actually, it takes government to force that to happen. It takes the U.S. government has to stand up and say, you will now be more transparent. Otherwise, they're not going to do it. I mean, they're exempt for auditing by law in the U.S. government. The government accountability can't be. There's no accountability in terms of how they spend money. They are not audited by the accounting offices at all, and that's done by law. Well, that has to change. They have to change that. They have to hold them accountable for the money they spend. They have to examine them to make sure whatever they're doing is, and whatever they say they're doing is right and true, because they lie all the time. I mean, the witness, the Clapper, lying about, well, we don't collect on U.S. citizens. Witness other representatives of the government going and saying, we don't randomly tap fiber optic lines or communications lines inside the United States.
These people need to be prosecuted.
Yes, they do. I mean, theoretically, if you wanted to stop it and make it sure that it stopped, you have to prosecute these people.
There's 2 parts I think are relevant to this in terms of citizenry. Part 1, what do you think about an independent civilian commission that consists of technical expertise, even as far as moral and ethical expertise? What do you think about having this sort of a commission that goes into the NSA once a year?
Oh, no, not once a year. No, you got to do it more often. In fact, that's what we suggested to the president in January of last year. Here's how to fix NSA. And one of the big points is you have to have a way for the Congress, the administration, and because the administration can't trust what these agencies are doing either. And also all the courts. And I don't mean the FISA court, I mean the Article 3 courts. The FISA court is not an Article 3 court. It's an administration court, meaning an Article 2. Article 1 in our Constitution is the Congress. Article 2 is the administration, the president, and all of the agencies in the government. Article 3 of the courts, federal courts, all the way down through the local areas and the appellate courts and things like that. So all those are supposed to be, according to our Constitution, checking and balancing the activities of each other. The courts are supposed to rule whether something was constitutional or not. Congress is supposed to be able to check on the administration to make sure they weren't violating any laws or any of the things that was the intent of Congress, and so on. So we were supposed to have a check and balance process that would work inside the government of the United States by the 3 parts of the government, but that's totally failing. And so one of the suggestions we made was a way of, when Reagan said trust but verify, was a way of verifying what these agencies were doing, and that was to do basically what you were suggesting. We said take hackers out of the United States, give them clearances and the authority to go into any intelligence agency, look on any computer, any storage device, anywhere, and look at any analyst and all the tools and things that they were doing with the data to ensure that what they were saying they were doing was really what they were doing.
So part B of my question was in terms of prosecution. What can the citizens do to sort of get people, high officials that violated the Constitution, get them prosecuted? Because we know it's not working anymore inside the government, as you've claimed.
Here's what I've been suggesting inside the United States on radio and television. That we hold a state's constitutional convention under Article 5 of the Constitution. This is the way the founders designed a way that the states could fix the federal government in Washington should it be totally out of bounds. So under Article 5 of the Constitution, we can have all the states get together and form a constitutional convention, set up and make changes to the Constitution and ratify them at the same time. And so it becomes law and constitutional law. And then that could be used to, it could be enforced to be able to create a special prosecutor to go after everybody in D.C. Everybody. Also, behind it, we could put the power of the state police and also the militias and the National Guards of all the states. So there's the ability to assemble the local police and all as a part of that process too. So there's that reservoir of power behind it that could enforce it. And the special prosecutor then could take them all to federal courts.
To my last question, we know that the gap between the rich and the poor is growing tremendously around globally. And even global warming is running away. It's becoming a major problem according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. If we do not take immediate action now, we will see runaway climate change. So the NSA surveillance state, the surveillance state as a whole, in my view, is preparing for this catastrophe that there's so many poor people and then climate change, there will be domestic uprising. So don't you think making privacy a central issue diverts people away from the problems that are before us, because the government is basically reacting in a manner that it foresees? Should we not focus on more economic issues and climate change instead of taking privacy as sort of the central issue?
No, because privacy is the issue that underlines everything. It is the fundamental principle that governs freedom, initiative, creativity, and innovation. If you don't have that freedom, you get to be like East Germany or the Soviet Union, that becomes very stagnant. Civilization stops progressing.
Even economically.
Yeah, even economically, yes. Of course, because then what it does is it stymies creativity and innovation. That's what's going to save us on any of these issues.
So you suggest hand-in-hand approach?
Absolutely.
William Binney, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
And that is all from the team in Munich. I'm Zain Raza. Thank you for joining us.